Hi there, this is Jonathan Ross. In the following set of tutorials, we are going to take a look at Adobe After Effects, not CC, but CS6. Now, one of the things that I do want to point out is that there are a lot of great new features to After Effects Creative Cloud, and unfortunately, we're not going to be talking about any of that stuff because we don't have it here. But here's the thing. After Effects is an incredibly rich application. If you look at all the stuff, live 3D pipeline and refine edging tools and warp stabilization, 3D camera tracking, these are some pretty powerful tools. This pixel motion blur looks kind of cool, but After Effects is an incredibly rich tool that allows you to do amazing things. Just go take a look at the showcase that they have out there, and you will see just incredible animations. See if I can bring that thing up. Let's see. Come on. Oh, they're PDFs. Well, who wants to open up a PDF? I wanted to see a video. Another time. Let's get started with After Effects. Now, if you're even looking at this video, then the reason why is because you have heard of After Effects, you kind of know what it does, but maybe you don't know how to use it yet. So the first thing that you need to understand is the fact that After Effects, the name comes from after you've imported stuff, after you've done other things, then you apply effects to it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't create stuff or content in After Effects itself, but really that's not where its strength really lies. But it does help you understand why when you come to this, you can't do anything, because you can't do anything until you've created something to do something with. So the first thing that we need to do is create a new composition. Now we can do this a number of different ways. We can go up to Composition, New, we can press Control N, and we can click on this little New Composition button right down there in the project window. Now our project window is where all of our compositions and imported footage are going to live. Now, when we open up this composition, the first thing that we need to really think about are what are the settings of this composition that we need to have. Now, there's a lot of different presets. The presets are for custom and web video, as well as NTSC video, and then high def video, and then even film down here at the lower part. This does not mean that these are the only things that you can use. Obviously, you can put anything that has a height and a width and a pixel aspect ratio you can put in here. But I think it's best to choose presets if you're not sure, because you want to think about how that animation is going to be used. Is this thing going to be going out to 720, 29.97, which is basically 30 frames a second? If so, then you want to use those settings. This is a good kind of middle of the road high def setting. It's 720 by or 1280 by 720, so it's high def, and it's square pixels versus being some of the like non-square pixels that NTSC has, and boy am I glad that we're not dealing with those anymore. They always create a headache because what you see on screen is not exactly what you get when you actually watch it on TV. But with square pixels, what we see on our screen doesn't have any pixel aspect ratio correction, and what we see on screen is what will render, and it will look the same, and that's really nice. The next thing we might want to look at is what our frame rate is. We're going to leave it at 29.97 because we know that we're outputting this to video. If we knew that we were only doing it for the web, then it would certainly be possible for us to use 30 frames and not have to deal with this 29.97. But we know that we're going to be using this somewhere in a DVD or Blu-ray that we're making along the lines. So that's why we're going with that 29.97. Now the other stuff is our time code. This is what the start time code is, and the last part is the end of our time code. Now we should point out the different parts of the time code. If you're not used to this, the first part that you have are the frames, then you have seconds, then you have minutes, and then you have hours. I've never seen an animation in After Effects that was hours long, so I don't think you'd ever do that. But it is there if you need it. Anyway, all you have to do is type in the numbers that you want, clear all this stuff, type in the numbers you want, and go for it. Now we can actually kind of mess with the timeline of our, the duration of our timeline after the fact, but it's good to have a nice set thing. I'm actually going to change mine to 10 seconds so that it's a little bit shorter. Now the background color right now is black, and that works fine because if we were going to render this video, black would be its natural color unless you have something else there. But of course you can give it any other colors that you want. And one of the things I love about After Effects is the ability to click on the little eyedropper, and then you can go anywhere you want on that screen and pick colors. And you'll even see it comes up with automatically coming up with names, like once I get over that medium gray red versus a deep yellow. I'm going to go ahead and click on this again and change it back to black so that I actually have it on black. Now I'm going to click OK, not worrying about the composition name. Before I do that though, I could go and look at the advanced stuff, and this has to do with 3D and ray trace 3D, which we're not going to be dealing with in our tutorials at this point. We're just dealing with the basics. So we'll click OK, and now you'll see some differences. Up at the top, or actually really on the left, you now have that comp in your project window. That's where all your imported footage and comps will live. The next thing we have is our composition window, which is what this composition visually looks like currently, which is pretty boring. The next thing down here is our timeline, and this will have all of our layers and other things that we've imported into this composition. Just because you've placed something in the project does not mean it is in your composition. You can have lots of different compositions, as many as you want, and you'll find compositions that are inside compositions, and that's when we'll call them a pre-comp, and we'll get to that later. This is just a way for you to organize your information or the project assets that you have, and then this is actually when you're editing the individual animations that you're creating. Anyway, the first thing that we're going to do is create some content. So if you look here at the top, you'll see that we've got some different things up here. We've got our rectangle tool, our pen tool, and our horizontal type tool. And these allow us to create that content. We also have the brush tool and clone stamp tool and eraser tool. So those allow us to create some content too. Actually, I guess we can't until we're on the right tool. So anyway, I'm going to go to the rectangle tool. You can see when you hover over that item, I could also press the Q key, and that's what that little Q is next to it. If I press the Q key, it'll also go to that tool, which is nice. Anyway, if I select that, oops, I really didn't mean to do that, but actually that's a good thing to know. If you double click on the tool, on that rounded rectangle, it actually creates a shape at the full size. I'm going to go ahead and delete that layer because I really didn't mean to create it, and I'm going to click and drag this time. Now when you click and drag, you'll see that you have your fill settings and stroke settings that are up here, and you can change some of these settings if you want. If you want to change the color, or you want to change the color of your stroke, you want to change the size of your stroke. You can also add some other elements to this as well. You can add more rectangles, more ellipses, more polystars. That's kind of interesting. Just be aware that you are actually creating multiple objects within one layer or one other object. So that's kind of weird. But there's another way to do it. You can actually do this by drawing with the same tool, the rounded rectangle tool. I can edit the stuff that's here by just drawing a new object off to the side. Now, since I was currently selected, here's something actually I just thought about, which is different. Because I used the add thing in here, I actually added the rectangle to that one shape in here. You can see there's two different rectangle paths inside that one rectangle. But the other one created a whole new rectangle. But both of these are encased within one shape layer that I can move as one layer together. Now you need to be aware of this because sometimes you want to create new layers so that you have the ability to move each one separately in a little bit more easily than trying to select this one object inside that object and try and give it the motion path inside of it. I wouldn't typically suggest that at all. So you really want the ability to move these separate. If you click off of any object, then you are able to select nothing, which is great. With nothing selected, when you go up and you create a new object, this will also create a new shape layer. So if I click off of that, and here's a trick, if you're trying to get to the arrow tool quickly, just press down the control key at any time, and you can click once off of the object, and then go and select another object. Otherwise, you can go and click somewhere on your timeline down here and have that layer unselected. Now, once again, if you are currently on a layer, when you go to a tool and create something, then you are creating another rectangle on that layer, and that can get confusing really, really quick. So I'm going to delete a lot of these so I don't have those to deal with. Now the next type of object is our pen tool. With nothing selected, you correctly assume that we will create a new object when we use the pen tool. So I've just created the object with that pen tool. Now I can click on it with a black arrow and move it around that I want. If I want to edit this path though, I do want to point out that it doesn't seem super easy to me to edit this path. At least the way that I'm used to. Now I can go into the contents, go and try and find that path right here and see if I can edit that shape, but I really have to go back to the pen tool or to the pen tool other tools and try and edit this, and you'll see it just doesn't give me the flexibility that I want, and I'm not exactly there, finally I got to it. Now I can edit this thing the way that I want. Just seems a little bit weird to me. It doesn't seem as effective as other ways of using the pen tool, which we'll get to in just a minute. So honestly, I never create these. So let's get rid of that. And I would always, let's make sure we delete the whole thing. I would always suggest not making objects like that. Now you can use the type tool, and it's quite effective. Just click or click and drag and start typing. Now the settings of this text can be changed by selecting the text, and when you're on the type tool you just select text just like you would in any other document, and then over on the right you can see our settings there, and we can change whatever it is that we need to change. And then I can go to the black arrow to move this as a one whole object. Now when I'm on the type tool, I probably don't want to go ahead and try and create text in there, and that's one of the things that I like that it does do. Whereas with rectangles, you create multiple rectangles within one shape, it always sees text as separate items. So if you click somewhere else down here and create new text, you will see that text comes up, and it even named it according to what the text is. So if I change the text in here, you'll see that how it's referred in my layers will also change. So that's really quite nice. Now you can do a whole bunch of stuff to this text as well, just so you are aware of it. And to find out some of those settings, one of the things that you need to explore as you start to learn After Effects are all the different settings everything has. Now you'll notice that we've got all these settings here, and if you really want to see where these are applied in animation, you want to open up your layers until you see the different properties that are there. For example, as I open up this text layer, you'll see I've got my source text, I've got a path, anchor group stuff, and anytime you see this little stopwatch, that means that's a property that can be animated. So you can also see that we've got some other features for this text as well, such as the ability to animate our rotation of this text. And if I were to animate that rotation, you'll see it's actually rotating the individual characters versus the entire word. So it's not the same rotation as we have for the entire object down here in our transform. So you'll see that rotates the entire object versus the other one is the rotation of the individual characters of that text. So you'd have to be very careful about how you look at this and how you interpret this graph that's down here, or this hierarchy, because you do want to be aware of what is within what. And we'll come back to this in a little bit about really being able to understand some of these properties and some of the other items here. Before I do that, though, I wanted to talk about creating another solid, because we've been creating content here within After Effects. So one of my favorite content items is just a plain solid. To do that, we can go to Layer, New, and you'll see there's lots of different things in here. We can do new lights, do new cameras, we can do null objects, and the shape layer, which we already did, and even adjustment layers, which are kind of cool. But sometimes all you want is just a simple solid. So if you click on solid, it will come up with an automatic name based upon the color that you've chosen. I've chosen kind of a blue color. You have your size for your width and your height, which are usually based upon whatever the current comp is, but it actually remembers what your last new solid was. So if I change this to 500 pixels by 500 pixels, then I can certainly make a solid that's only that size, not the entire comp size. Click OK, and you'll see I now have a solid which is 500 pixels by 500 pixels. Now this solid in here is going to retain as a square unless I mask it or do something. And that's what I wanted to go to, because we have these tools that we used to create content before, but now, at least the rounded rectangle and the pen tool, we can actually use these to modify this existing solid. The way we do that is by selecting that tool, having our solid selected, and clicking and dragging on our solid. Now you'll see this time the difference is what I'm creating is a mask on this particular solid. I'm not creating a new solid primitive or drawing, I don't even know what it's called, shape layer. I'm not creating a new shape layer. I'm creating a mask on an existing layer. And that really is different, because it gives me some options that are a little different as well, and it takes away a whole lot of options as well. It takes away a lot of options of creating things like adding strokes and other things to it, which can kind of get in the way, but you can definitely see that you've got the ability to feather your mask and change the opacity of your mask and do all sorts of stuff, which can be interesting. Now you do need to be aware that this mask will only go to the end of the object, and after the end of the object you will actually see the end of that object, so it won't just continue going out and out as you would with a drawing object or a drawing shape. So it's just masking the object that's there, but if you let your mask go too far, you will see that exact object. Anyway, I find it a little bit easier to work with the shapes and such here, because when you click on it, you can automatically go to the tools that you need to be able to edit this. Now this is especially important, and I'm going to delete that mask, and let's do that again. You'll notice that when I have the mask shape selected, I can delete the currently selected shapes, and you'll see that mask is currently selected versus the entire object. And now I can delete the mask itself without deleting the object. Now the reason I was doing this is because I want to go back to the pen tool and click and drag, and you'll see now I have the ability to create a Bezier mask on this, and it's a little bit easier for me to be able to edit this mask at any time. I click off the object, and you'll see it's the whole object I can move around, but if I click on the mask, I immediately get the handles and the ability to change things if I need that. So for me personally, I really prefer using masks than using the drawing primitives or something like that, the shape layers, because that's kind of the way I am. Anyway, there is one other thing that I want to point out about this, and that is that I often don't want to be able to see the actual handles and such for the mask. I just want to see the results of the mask. So in order to do this, we need to start looking at some of the other composition settings that we have. For example, you'll see down here we have a lot of different options. One of those options is to turn on and off the mask. So I can toggle that mask on and off. Now you can certainly turn it on when you want to edit it, turn it off when you want to stop editing it. But I also want to point out that anytime you have an object that has a mask on it, that really is a footage item. And you can double click on that footage item and you can bring up that layer by itself. As soon as you bring up that layer by itself, you'll see that you've got some new icons and you've got a new timeline here that looks different, so that we know that we are no longer in the composition, but we are in the settings of that object. This also lets me see a little bit more distinctly the shape that I have and how it fits inside the original object that I'm using, or footage item that I'm using. Obviously my composition is rectangle, but if you remember, the solid that we made was 500 pixels by 500 pixels. So as I go into here, you'll see that I can see how that mask is actually fitting on that 500 pixels. Now I have the ability to edit this mask and do things. I can also turn off that ability if I don't want, but we're probably going to want to be able to see the masks when we're in our solid settings there. Anyway, or our footage item. I can close that footage item, go back to the composition, and there's lots of other things here that are really nice to know about. Some of those things are whether or not you want to see title safe grids, or proportional grids, or grids themselves. So you can turn these things on and off as needed. You can also go to particular times in that composition. You can take a snapshot, and if I were to move this item, I could then view the original snapshot to see where it was before. And this works, of course, for lots and lots of things. I can also see just certain things, like what the red channel looks like, what the green channel looks like, and maybe what the alpha channel looks like. And I think this is very effective because you do want to know what's going on with your alpha and other things sometimes. The next thing that we have here is what our current resolution is. Right now it's on auto, which means that it's just showing me this in half resolution. As I zoom up, you'll see it switch to full. So it says, hey, well, we want to have a somewhat decent quality for what we see, and half is enough resolution to be able to see this pretty well. The next thing that we have is a region of interest, where we might just view what's going on in one little tiny region, and then it won't show the rest of it. The other thing is our transparency, so we can see what it would look like if we were using a transparency grid. The next thing we have is our active camera, and this will work a lot more when we have like 3D layers and things like that. This will be useful, and that also kind of goes in conjunction with multiple views, so we can see more than one view of what this particular composition looks like. It's a little bit weird at first, but can be very effective. Since we are not using pixels that have been distorted, like for NTSC video, the pixel aspect ratio correction won't matter to us at all. Fast previews, this means that it adapts to the resolution. This really only matters when you start getting into really complex animations and your computer's going slow and you need to figure out how to make your previews a little bit faster. The next thing that we have is our timeline, which just switches to it, and this is kind of interesting. This is our composition flowchart, which allows us to see how different compositions are nested inside other compositions. Very effective once you get used to it, but we don't need to cover it in this. We've now kind of covered the basics of creating content and dealing with the composition window here. You know, what you want to do is start experimenting with creating different rounded rectangles, maybe change your colors and such as you create them, just to see what your different options are. Also play with, once you've gotten something created, play with the add, because this can really do some really interesting stuff, because you've got some fun little effects that you can apply. But be aware that these are not always very effective in animations, and you do have to be aware of how this is going to kind of work. You'll see that wiggle path is kind of interesting because it makes the whole thing kind of wiggle around. So there's some really neat things in here, but just be aware of the limitations of it, and also be aware that if you want to create a new layer, a new shape layer, you do want to unselect that one before you create the other one so they're not embedded into the same object. Alright, so that's the end of this tutorial. Let's go on to the others. Thanks.